Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, a Martin Luther King Day special. We will look at Dr. King's involvement in the Selma, Alabama marches that led to voting rights for African Americans. And we'll hear from a man who was part of the civil rights community in Selma at the time of those marches. That's next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to this special Martin Luther King Day edition of Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. In 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists led 3 marches from Selma, Alabama to the state capitol in Montgomery to protest for voting rights. The violent reaction from Alabama state troopers and sheriff's officials as the marchers tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge caused a national outrage. Later that year, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The events of the times are portrayed in the film Selma, which was recently released. And here now to talk about the marches and the movie is Dr. Matthew Whitaker, an Arizona State University Foundation professor of history and founding director of ASU's Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. And also joining us is retired Air Force Colonel and pilot Richard Dick Tolliver, who was active in the civil rights community in Selma at the time of the marches. Good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, let's start on this. Give us a background of the marches, why they happened, where they happened.
At this particular time in 1965, the activists had become very frustrated. When you come off of the euphoria of the 1963 March on Washington, the euphoria associated with the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, many folks wanted and believed that change on the ground would happen quicker than it was. They were faced with the fact that there were still tremendous barriers, particularly barriers to voting. And in Alabama, which was the cradle of the Confederacy in many ways, many people argue that this was the epicenter. This is where many of the injustices happened. This is where the tide was going to be turned. And so there was a very vibrant movement on the ground in Alabama, very vibrant activists on the ground in Alabama. And after the murder of Jackson, just preceding the march in 1965, people decided that they needed to do something very, very aggressive. And they reached out to folks at the national level. King and Abernathy and the SCLC, the SNCC came together with local groups that had been involved in Alabama, and all of this converged in Selma.
I was going to ask, Selma was just literally the spot where it was the hottest, it was the most active, the most vocal?
It was in many ways, and many things came together in Selma as well. And that together was sort of a powder keg that was going, something had to give at that particular point.
And you were in Selma at this time. Did you hear about there were 3 marches, we'll get to all 3 of them in a second here. The first one, did you hear about it beforehand? How electric and how, there was no Facebook or Twitter back then, so how did people know about all this?
Well, we didn't know that the march itself was going to take place right away, but with the activities Dr. Whitaker said, there was much activity, and one of the reasons there was so much activity is that in Dallas County, where Selma was the center, there were like 30,000 people, and only a handful were registered voters. And so they actually started a voters' rights movement there, and so all throughout the community they were trying to petition to get into the local downtown office to get people registered to vote. And it was just impossible for them, and that was the thing that really stimulated the activity. And so the idea of a march, well, they were marching as it was. They were marching throughout the city. The young man that Dr. Whitaker spoke of, Jimmy Lee Jackson, had been murdered by a local state policeman in Marion, Alabama, which is about 20 miles away. And it was on a march that they were involved in there to go and get registration and so on. So the impetus was really to get people voted, and that just mushroomed more and more and more. And so the people began to be creative. How can we get our voices raised? Because there was violence at the voting rights offices. There were people that had been beaten down. Mm-hmm. The local sheriff had basically brutally knocked a woman to the ground. It was all over the news. People were being beaten for just attempting to vote. a register and so on. So that was a catalyst that actually started the movement itself.
And Dr. King's involvement here, how did he become involved, and talk about the impact of his involvement on the marches, 1, 2, and 3, all three marches?
And that's a complicated history, in part because a lot of stuff was already going on the ground in Selma, just like it was in communities around the country. And Dr. King, at a certain point in his organization, more importantly, were asked to come in for support, for guidance, for input. But what many people interpreted when he arrived was King arriving in an authoritarian sort of role. So Selma is when you actually start to see some of the beginning of the breakages between younger, more assertive and militant members of the movement who wanted to direct action now, and Dr. King and his group, all ministers,
yes,
who were a bit more controlling and had more connections to the federal government, who were having conversations with the federal government about whether to march or not, when many of the younger people in the community who lived there had already made decisions
yes,
about marching. And so those sort of things came to a head.
Yes, and let me say that Dr. King initially was not to be involved.
That's
it
right.
was locally done by the organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and CORE, the other. And so they had people on the ground months before the first attempt to go across the bridge.
That's right.
And it was a great cataclysmic event on the bridge when Dr. King then was sought to come to Selma.
That's right.
Because he was not going to be there. He had other priorities and other things going on. But with the total failure and the carnage that took place that Sunday, March 7th, 1965, in the afternoon, on Sunday afternoon, that was the thing that ultimately led him to come to Selma.
Before we get to Bloody Sunday, the first march, real quickly, we think of Dr. King in a certain way now. There are folks who have been born after his assassination. For those of us who remember Dr. King at the height of his importance, at the height of his prominence, at this march, was Dr. King the Dr. King we think of now, or was he just a national name or a bigger name than others? Because you mentioned there was a little bit of, not infighting, but that sort. Who was Dr. King back then?
Yes, by now he was well known. It was after the March of 1963 in August. With that brought him to the height of his recognition, and it was following that he got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay, so all right, so
he's an international
figure.
figure.
Now an international figure, but he was still embracing, and he was very dedicated to the nonviolent protest for change. He was really an ambassador for that, and he held that all the way through. And so he was now a national and international figure, and the groups that were there on the ground were now trying to get him to come.
Okay, so he was Dr. King
He
back when he was Dr. King.
And he brought the media with him. Wherever he went, he brought international attention.
Yes.
All right, so we've got the march. It's set to go. They try to cross the bridge, and my goodness, the newsreels show just mayhem. What happened?
Just the ugliest face of white supremacy and racism you can possibly imagine. And we were just saying earlier when we were chatting, lots of young people right now can't even fathom the brutality. One of the things that I appreciated that they showed in the film was the bats with the barbed wire around them, the horses kicking people, the batons with women and many folks who were essentially kids. It was very, very, very brutal. And only by exposing that type of brutality to the rest of the world could the activists get most people who in their living rooms in Iowa or in Seattle couldn't begin to appreciate what they were dealing with every day.
But first they had to disobey a local ordinance that had been passed in Selma in Dallas County. The city hastily passed a law that says no more than 2 blacks could be on the streets of Selma at any one time. That meant if you had a family of 4, you couldn't go downtown, you couldn't be seen on the street, you couldn't walk the streets, and that was known, and people got arrested for being on the street. Supposedly, they said if you are more than 2, you're inciting a riot, and therefore we're going to arrest you. And that went all the way out to the Air Force Base. We had some issues out there, and 2 airmen coming from the base could not be, more than 2 could not approach the town. And not only that, you couldn't go to town unless you were in your uniform. And that's the whole story behind that. So there was an ordinance that says if you get stopped on the streets of Selma and there are 3 of you black people, you're going to go to jail for inciting a riot. And then, of course, that was backed up by Governor Wallace, says that it was against the law to have protests in the streets of your city. And so they were, in fact, protesting that in a nonviolent way. And they attempted then to make that initial plunge onto the bridge, and they were very peacefully coming across the bridge. But the state troopers and the sheriff at the time, Jim Clark, had barricaded the pathway and had authorized his people on his signal to wade up into the crowd and brutally beat them back. The news had also gone out into the community that any white folk who agreed with Clark could come to wherever, when the signal was given, come to where we are,
right.
and then you can wait up and you can be part of the melee.
That's right.
You mentioned reaction from people in Iowa, from people around the country, everywhere. What was the reaction, and how did that impact the second march, which I believe was just 2 days later, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the most part, people were shocked and mortified. Many were inspired. You had people like Viola Liuzzo, who was a white Italian-American activist who felt so moved by what she saw that she got in her car and went down to Alabama just to help organize and participate. So it also motivated people to come down there and assist and to help, because it was just very bright. And this is at the same time that the United States is trying very hard to present itself as a beacon of light with regard to issues of democracy and freedom, that you're seeing these images of the antithesis of that. So many people were motivated to go help.
So that second march then, march, not as violent, but there was still violence associated,
Well,
correct?
there was the second march, the one that was successfully started and continued on to Montgomery, came 2 weeks later when Dr. King got down there, and others, as Dr. Whitaker is saying, Ms. Viola Liuzzo came down from the north. By then, of course, the minister from Boston had been killed on the streets, had been bludgeoned to death on the streets. So we had 2 deaths already by the time the marches came about. Jimmy Lee Jackson in Marin, and then Minister Reeb. And so Mrs. Liuzzo and others, they came. Thousands of them actually came, about 3,000 actually, descended upon Selma.
And she was eventually killed too.
Yes, she was killed on the day that the march was successfully completed. But we had white people, we had Hispanics, we had Jews, Gentiles, Catholics. We had people from all kinds of faiths that descended upon Selma because the call was made, come to Selma to join us in this trek to Montgomery. So when they started then on, and by now there was a great interaction going on between Dr. King and the people in Selma and President Johnson. It was a real tug of war because the president, they had asked for the naturalization of the naturalized, federalized rather, of the state troopers, by the way, and the Air National Guard or the Army Guard. And so the president finally federalized the same people who had been on the opposite side of the issue. And so now they had federal troops in protection of them when they started the second march across the bridge on the way to Montgomery.
Was that now the second? Because I know the third march, there were a ton of federal troops there, or at least enough to get more protection. Were the federal troops and the federal state troopers and such, were they there in the second march as well? Because my impression was that third march is when that really kicked in.
For the most part, yes. Certainly not the numbers that you would find in the second march. The third march, you had more.
Yes.
You had more of those troopers that were there. But I think one of the interesting things that I'd like to emphasize too, with regard to people that were coming down to help, answering the call, coming to Selma, many of them literally dropped what they were doing to go. They didn't have places to stay. Many of them didn't, they had enough transportation. We're talking about young people. There were ministers like our local Dr. Paul Eppinger, who heads up the Arizona Interfaith Movement, who marched with King as well. They had congregations that they were leaving. It was so important to them that they dropped it and went. And the wonderful story is all of the people who embraced them when they got there. Because this is their home, you know. So they opened their doors to these strangers that they had never met, who had answered the call to come down and want to help.
Talk to us about that dynamic, that interaction. What was it like down there? Because, I mean, people from out of town, you got to get used to them a little bit, but how did that play down there?
Well, I think the local people were very generous people, and they were willing to accept any help that they could get. And they were so hungry for change and for the rights, the civil rights and so forth. So anybody who came or showed up, they were welcome. They were welcome with open arms. And it was like your family. You showed up, now you embraced this family, and God will love you, and so on. Now, that was to those who were coming into the black community. Now, the white community, on the other hand, was violently opposed to it, and they were very vicious in their behavior and their activities and so on. And so you got a real violent kickback from the local white people that lived in the area.
What was going on at the military base?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I happen to have been the only African-American officer on the base out of some 300 students who were trying to get the pilot wings. We had such violent activities coming onto the base from the local community. Plus, we had young men who were from the Deep South on the base whom I encountered that made my life as a student very difficult, and certainly with some of the instructors as well. But there was an incident that took place. There was a student from Ecuador, from a high-ranking official in Ecuador that was in our class. But he attempted to date one of the young girls downtown, and he went missing for a few days. And when they found him, he had been in jail and had been badly beaten up because he was of dark hue and so on, and he was basically looked upon as a Hispanic, but he was actually an Ecuadorian. And when the news got to Washington through the consul that we had a foreign student that had been so mishandled, then the Air Force sent a general officer down to investigate the matter. Well, I had already petitioned some of the issues that I was dealing with, and I was not given an opportunity to live on the base. When I arrived, they said, you can't live on the base, it's for staff only, and so I had to find a place, basically rent a room or two downtown to bring my wife and my children down, but it was an old retired school teacher and a principal next door. And one night, the Klan burned a cross on the lawn where we were staying. And so now we're faced with having to get out of Selma or get off the base. But that attitude was pervasive all the way on the base. But when the general came to us, we were called all together, all of the blacks on the base called into theater and said, okay, here's the deal. I've worked out a situation that you can go off base, but you've got to be in your uniform. You've got to pay attention to the curfew. You cannot go and attempt to do anything, participate in the activities and so on and so forth. And if you do, then the bet's off and you're on your own.
My goodness.
Well, when I stood up as the only officer and demanded a transfer, that day I was given an opportunity. Says, well, we're not going to transfer you, we'll move you on base. And when I moved on base, I discovered that there were several students in my class that were already living on base for 6 months. And I'd been denied an opportunity to live on base. But I had participated in holding a party for the children in Selma for Christmas, the little black kids, and I became involved in that activity, and that put the spotlight on one lieutenant, and that's what caused some of the consternation that I faced.
Okay, we've got the 3 marches now. The third one's successful. We got, and by the way, we should mention, Selma to Montgomery is no Sunday stroll. It's a 54-mile walk
54
here.
miles.
And you got some 25,000 winding up at the Capitol building. LBJ winds up signing the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
Talk about LBJ. And because I know the film, there's some controversy regarding. Yeah, there's some controversy regarding his will, because it sounds as though he had the war on poverty. He was very big on the war on poverty, and he was afraid all of this was going to either supersede or slow Talk about that whole
Well,
formula.
and he had a strained relationship with King. For a while, he looked at King as someone who he sort of oddly admired because of his spunk, his tenacity. LBJ, as one author wrote, was the big daddy from the Pedernales. He had this big personality, and he appreciated other big personalities. But as things became intense, he started referring to King as that, blankety blank Negro preacher. I can't repeat that on the first part on the air.
I appreciate that.
Because he felt as though that activity was threatening to derail his Great Society programs. And the tragedy of that, and what King was trying to get him to see, and other leaders were trying to get him to see, is that they're not antithetical. Those two efforts are inextricably linked: the Great Society, the war on poverty, and fighting for civil rights. And so it became a very tense thing. LBJ, the controversy around LBJ is many people are arguing that he played a bigger role in the passage of the Voting Rights Act than the film is actually depicting, which many people take issue with, because Selma, out of all of the protests, was by and large, and for the most part, framed, organized, and executed primarily by African Americans. Now, if you're talking about Freedom Summer, if you're talking about some other efforts that was more diverse, and so people take issue with it because of all of the historical films, Mississippi Burning and others, the white leaders end up being the primary protagonists of the film, in stories that were driven by African Americans. And so I think that's at the root of some of the consternation.
With that in mind, you've seen the film.
Yes, I have.
What do you think of the film?
I think the film is very, very accurate of the events that took place down there. I've seen many films. We've talked about Malcolm X. We've seen other war films. Of course, I'm a warrior. I've seen those. I've seen the Red Tails and so forth. I think this film is more accurately portrays the things that really took place there. I think the storylines are accurate. I think the scenes that were played out, particularly on that bridge scene, I thought that was exceedingly accurate, because it showed what really took place. The men on the horses, the beating of the people, John Lewis, the iconic figure of the young man trampled and beaten to the ground. And the only part it didn't show is that they actually continued those horses on into some of the homes. They chased the people back to the church, rode the horses into the churches and all of that. So, but the actual...
You had to excuse yourself at some point? It was so...
Yeah, in the movie itself, it got so real at one point that I really had to excuse myself.
Yeah.
Because I have lived now 50 years, and 50 years have made a difference in looking backwards in terms of the harshness of the time. Life does that, and that's a good thing. And so over the years, I've survived Selma, but I've lived a whole life. And so when I see these things, I'm looking at them now through the life that I've been blessed to live. But I didn't expect to be so emotionally disturbed until I saw that scene on the bridge. And that was when I knew that there's still a pain of recollection. I've never forgotten that scene. In fact, I know today that the scene that I saw on that day in Selma was absolutely the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a few. I've been in war, as you know, from my other times and all of that. But I've never seen, held in my mind, the scene that I saw that Sunday afternoon.
Those kinds of passions and emotions from someone who was there says a lot about this film. What else do we need? We got a couple minutes left here. Your thoughts on the film, historical accuracy, the impact, what it says, what we learn.
I think it reaffirms the power of history to be able to contextualize through images, right? Through acting, through depictions, what actually happened. It can be done if it's done well. You take your time to do it, and it can help re-educate different generations of people. We got to keep telling the stories, lest we forget. We may be doomed to repeat at some point.
Do you find that the kids these days just quite don't get it?
I think they want to, and I think it behooves us as leaders to be able to provide it to them. I was telling Mr. Tolliver that I'm looking forward to inviting him to one of my classes, because I think they think I'm making some of it up. And I think that that's true. I think they think sometimes we are embellishing because in many ways it's a different world. And we need folks to say, yes, this is what human beings are capable of if we don't educate and embrace each other. So I think it's very powerful.
And I think the positive part of Moose Day and being able to pick that is young people today are very attuned to all the graphics and all of that, and they believe that is reality.
Yes.
So in that sense, that's a positive side of that. And I think when the stories are really told accurately, the amazing thing is people recognize the truth of it, and then they sense that they are part of it.
Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you both so much for joining us on this special Martin Luther King Day edition of Arizona Horizon. Thank you so
Ted.
much.
Thank you so much.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.